Buju Indinoy Maganadok. Anin. Kagegabo Indigenous. Mekanakan Dudem. Mekanak Wajuing and Dunjiba. Gakabekang and Danungum. Hello all of my relatives. That's a traditional Ojibwe greeting. And what I said there was, hello all of my relatives. My name is Kagegabo. I'm Turtle Clan. I'm a descendant of Turtle Mountain. And I live in Minneapolis today. And I'd like to say, Apajigo mi gwech bizendawieg. I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to these live Ojibwe Word of the Day broadcasts I've been doing on Facebook. I am blown away by how many people have watched, liked, shared some of these traditional teachings in Anishinaabe the Ojibwe language. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. So I love any chance I get to Ingechi Menwendan Anishinaabe Moyan. I really love to speak our Ojibwe language. And Apajigo Miigwech Bizendawieg. Thank you so much for listening. Well, one of our words of the day this week was Zigwan. It is spring. This is a very special time for Anishinaabe, for Ojibwe people. It is the new year for us. So this begins the 4-season cycle that Anishinaabe would consider a year. So it's Zigwan. It is spring, and that's a complete sentence on its own. It is spring. Niben, it is summer. Dagwagan, it is fall. And then Baboon, it is winter. And so, well, to commemorate the new year, what will happen is people will leave their hunting camps in the winter. They'll bring their families and clans together to the Iskagamiziganing, where they boil maple sap. And so every spring, Anishinaabe would get together and they would start harvesting, processing, and making and boiling down maple syrup, maple sap into maple syrup, and then ultimately into zinzibakwan, into sugar. And this was an incredibly important food to Anishinaabe. It is incredibly delicious. And to speak about mushkaki, it being the strength of the earth, it's a very healthy sugar for indigenous peoples. And so one of the cool things I like about maple syrup, aside from it being very delicious, is the story, or how did Anishinaabe, how did Native American people figure out how to get sap from a tree and then turn it into sugar? And quite literally, the tree told us. And that's our word of the day tonight, is Ininaatig. And actually, I'd like to preface this story with just some information. Indigenous cultures from the Atlantic coast, that's in Maine, in Vermont, in New Hampshire, in Quebec, in French Canada, all the way out to Wisconsin and Minnesota here, have all processed maple sugar. They all do it. Each one of these nations has a very special story that they tell with how they received the gift of maple sugar. So the one I'm telling tonight is by no means the definitive story. It's just one of many, and it's one I happen to enjoy. And yeah, if you have a chance to listen to another nation's story on how they received their gifts, I highly suggest you do it. It's an incredibly wonderful intellectual journey you'll go on. But if we look at it, it's Zigwan, it's springtime, the families are coming back, and this was a period actually where the Anishinaabe had great hunger. And sometimes it doesn't matter how much manomen and mandamen you store up for the winter, wild rice and corn, how well you do on the trap line, how well you do doing net fishing under the ice. Things can happen, and people can actually go without food. So this was another period where the Anishinaabe were hungry, and they were desperate because starvation is setting in. And so one time there was a fellow who was, praying and asking for help by a lake, and he hears a voice, and the voice said, "I'll help you. I will give you the sustenance you will need to get through this hard time, and I will take care of you." And this man standing by a lake, looks around, and he doesn't see anyone. What he thinks is a disembodied voice, but it's not. Who is actually speaking to him is Ininaatig, the man tree. The maple tree is telling him that if you tap me at the bottom by my trunk, then you can take the zinzibakwadabu from me, and that will give you sustenance. That will give you enough caloric intake. It will be medicine for you, and it will get you through these very tough times. And this is when he first received the gift of maple sugar. What came out of Ininaatig was actually real maple syrup. It wasn't sap, it was real maple syrup. And that was the first gift that the Ininaatig had. Later, our trickster uncle will come along, and he'll notice people just kind of being lazy, right, taking a tap, sticking it in the tree, kind of laying underneath the tap and letting the syrup drop into their mouths. And, he notices they're getting kind of fat, getting kind of lazy and complacent. And he says this is not going to do in the future. We can't have this. So he grabs a big birch bark noggin, or a makuk, takes it down to a river, fills it up with water, and then throws it on the treetops. And it saturates all of the trees, and all of these people, suddenly these people get a kind of a surprise that noticing that their pure maple syrup had been quite diluted and it's already become sap. And from now on, he says, you're going to have to work very hard to get maple sugar. And in fact, that's what that word means when I use that term, iskigamiziganing. It means where they boil the sap. And that's how you get maple sugar. You have to boil the water out of it. And, that's a part of the story too, is in that name, Ininaatig. And I think that's just a really amazing name. It comes from two words, Inini, man, and so that's what we would call a man, or the people. In some cases, if we were talking about like the Ojibwe people, their name for themselves is the Ininaatig. And then atig, which means wood-like. So, tree. He is the man tree. And it really tells you about Anishinaabeg's relationship to the Mitigug at that time, to the trees. Because this isn't a thing all of a sudden. This is a living, sentient being. And in fact, this is a being, Ininaatig, it was the man tree who took pity, who loved us unconditionally and then blessed us by giving us life, by giving us medicine and sustenance. And it gives you an idea of how the culture treats trees, how it treats a sinig, how it treats stones, how it treats Zibi 1, the rivers, Saga Iganin, the lakes, and that they're not just things. And in fact, if you actually give, or if you acknowledge a being like that, the Ininaatig, and in some dialects it's Ininaatig, as the man tree, all of a sudden you're saying, oh, this is another being like me. And you have to ask yourself, how does your relationship change to the maple? When it's just a maple, it's just a thing, it's just something you go and get syrup from. What about if it is man tree? And you notice that for Anishinaabe saying that, it has sap running through it, up and down, very much like the blood of Anishinaabe. And if you look at its leaf, the maple leaf, you'll notice that there's 5 points, just like a hand. So they are noticing that, this is a being like us. So when you see some of these indigenous cultures, or places where indigenous people have taken part in the political process. I saw this on Facebook this week. In New Zealand, they took one of their most important rivers and declared it a person, saying that this river has a right to not be polluted, it has a right to exist, and this river is very important to us. And you can get that idea that indigenous cultures have that feeling towards what in English may be inanimate things. Trees, rocks, river, water. That these things, are things, they're not beings. Whereas indigenous cultures can look at the river and say, we need to treat this person, we need to treat this river as a relative, as Ininaatig Magan, as my relative. And it's not just New Zealand. The next day, India declared two of their most sacred rivers, one of the most famous being the Ganges, people as well. And of course, in Bolivia, you have, the rights, Allah, the rights of Mother Earth. So a lot of these very important environmental factors figure in with our names and our relationships to the trees and what the tree's name is actually telling us and how they're healing us. So, it's just really, I really love that story. I really find that Ininaatig, Ojibwe Word, that a tree really did take great pity on us, loved us unconditionally, and then blessed us with medicine and with food and with a culture that we're able to pass down. And that if we treat this right, if we treat our relatives right, that they will continue to sustain us over the generations. So mi ie wa kiroyan nongo. That's all I'm going to say tonight. Apajigo mi gwech bizendawiek. Thank you so much for listening. And again, I genuinely mean that. I see that Biskite Naganake has been seen by over 11,000 people. So thank you very much for sharing my videos. And again, please feel free to share this with anyone who may be interested in Anishinaabe culture, Anishinaabe language, Anishinaabe spirituality. And again, meet you. Miigwech Bizendawieg. Thank you very much. Good night.